On page 219 and 220, we are going to look at solving compound inequalities. This is when you have two inequalities. You could have more, but we will just do two. Being solved together. We have two different types of inequalities. We have or inequalities and we have and inequalities. So 219 is going to cover the or inequalities and 220 will cover the and inequalities. So when you are graphing the or inequalities, what you will notice is you basically have two separate inequalities that you are graphing apart from each other, away from each other. Or sometimes people say is opposite, or I say to the outside. You should be shading to the outside. So when you look, this is what your answers are going to look like for your or problems. You're going to have two separate inequalities. So you just go ahead and do those separately. So x is less than or equal to -2 means we have a closed circle on -2 and we go to the left. For x is greater than 3, we would have an open circle at 3 and then we would go to the right. So two separate inequalities. You are shading or drawing to the outsides of the graph. So your interval notation, you just do two separate intervals that look just like what we did on the previous lesson. So for this one, we start with -infinity and we go to -2. Remember, infinity and -infinity always have a parenthesis. Since -2 is a closed circle, that means we have a bracket. And then you simply put the word or, just like you have in your answer. This one starts at 3 and goes to infinity. Infinity has a parenthesis, 3 is open, so it also has a parenthesis. So your answer needs to have your two separate inequalities. Then you need to graph them and write your interval notation. So when we look at number 1, two separate inequalities, you just solve them. So for our first one, we're going to add 4. X is less than -3. For the second one, divide both sides by 2. X is greater than or equal to 6. Since these are in the correct order, what I mean by that is your smaller numbers on the left, -3, and your bigger numbers on the right, which is 6. You can just write or in between, and that is your answer. If those are flipped around, then you need to flip them around for your answer. So our first one, x is less than -3, means we have open at -3, and we go to the left. X is greater than or equal to 6 means we're closed at 6, and we go to the right. Interval notation goes from -infinity to -3. Both of those should have parentheses. Or 6 to infinity. The 6 has a bracket, infinity has a parenthesis. For number 2, on the left-hand one, we divide by -3, which means we need to switch it to x is greater than or equal to +3. We divided by a negative, so you have to remember to flip your sign around. For our other one, we subtract 5 from both sides and get x is less than 1. So this right here is not your final answer. Those two need to be flipped around. Your smaller number and your less than sign always goes on the left. You need to write these in the same order that it is on your graph. So your actual answer needs to be x is less than 1 or x is greater than or equal to 3. This is your final answer. not that one. You need to rewrite it. Then to graph it, we have an open circle on 1, and we're going to the left. Then we have a closed circle at 3, and we're going to the right. So our interval notation goes from negative infinity to positive 1, both parentheses, or 3 to infinity. The 3 has a bracket. The infinity has a parenthesis. So again, you just solve them both separately. Make sure they're in the correct order that matches your graph. So your smaller one needs to be on the left, your bigger one needs to be on the right. And then you just graph and write interval notation separately. So for number 3, our one on the left-hand side, we subtract 9 from both sides. 2x is greater than 8. Divide by 2. X is greater than 4. Over here, we would subtract 10. 5x is less than 0. That doesn't mean you have no solutions. 0 is a number. If you divide by 5, x is less than 0. 0 divided by 5 is still 0. So these are flip-flopped, so we need to write it. X is less than 0, or x is greater than 4. That's what your final answer needs to be. You can't just put or in between right there. You need to rewrite it so your 0 is on the left and your 4 is on the right. So when I graph it, open at 0 and to the left. Open at 4 and to the right. Interval notation goes from negative infinity to 0, both parentheses, or 4 to infinity, both parentheses. Number 4, you would add 14 to both sides. 7x is greater than or equal to 14. Divide by 7, x is greater than or equal to 2. For our other one, we subtract 5. 4x is less than or equal to negative 8. Divide by 4, we do not flip it because we're dividing by positive 4. We get x is less than or equal to negative 2. So again, we need to flip those around. X is less than or equal to negative 2, or x is greater than or equal to positive 2. So we would have a closed circle at negative 2 and go to the left. An open circle, or a closed circle, sorry, at positive 2 and to the right. So the left-hand one, we go from negative infinity, always with a parenthesis, to negative 2. Negative 2 needs a bracket. Or positive 2 with a bracket, comma, infinity with a parenthesis. And finally, number 5. First, we're going to distribute. Negative 6x minus 3 is less than negative 15. Then I add 3 to both sides. Negative 6x is less than negative 12. Divide by negative 6. Since we divided by negative, we need to flip the sign. X is greater than 2. For our other one, we subtract 1 from both sides. Make sure you have the negative sign in front of the x greater than or equal to 4. Again, that means we need to divide by -1. Let's say you forget to flip the sign. Notice you have two greater than signs. That means you would shade over top of each other, which cannot happen in an OR inequality. So this right here tells you that you're wrong because you have two greater than signs. So you have to remember, since we divided by -1, you need to flip the sign around. So x is less than or equal to -4. This is also out of order, so we need to rewrite it. X is less than or equal to -4. Or x is greater than 2. That's your final answer for this one. So for our graphs, we would have a closed circle at -4 and go to the left. Then we would have an open circle at 2 and go to the right. Our interval notation goes from -infinity to -4. -infinity has a parenthesis, -4 has a bracket. Or 2 to infinity. Infinity always has a parenthesis. 2 also has a parenthesis because it's an open circle.